right, great. Thanks for coming to the crypto mining panel. So today we're so honored to have our 4 panelists. And yeah, so I'll just hit off the whole thing. And so time goes back to 2010 when everything started. One of my friends actually invited me to his apartment to see his BTC mining rig. It was a very old days. Everything was so simple. He's mining on the CPU. And later time, things changed to GPU, to FPGA, and to ASIC. So what has been changing? What are the advanced technology been helping the mining industry to improve the efficiency?
So first of all, I'm very thankful to be here. It's great to see so many people here and having such a big conference. All the people from the crypto industry coming together. I really remember back in like speaking on a panel in 2013 and 14 where there was like 20 people maybe in the audience, and that was like really considered as like a big success by that time. And the industry has really come a long way. So I think to answer your question, I think the major milestones and the improvements in the mining space throughout now more than a decade of history has been in many ways. I mean, obviously, on the chip side, a lot of things have happened. Like Satoshi, literally, he mined like on his CPU, as you mentioned, like, and he had like 1 megahash of hash rate. Now the newest chips, they have like half a terahash. So like from the hash rate capacity, like we basically went 1 million times further from like Satoshi times of mining to now. And the total hash rate has gone like from 1 megahash to like 200 exahash. So we're talking about a factor of 10 to the power of 12, how we improved. And obviously this is just one component, but yeah, the others are obviously the mining data centers are highly specialized and highly optimized for high density SHA-256 algorithm. And the data center designs have emerged and have improved over iterations and iterations over the years. And obviously, I mean, there's other components like algorithmic optimization. There's the software, like how do you maintain really the massive scale mining facilities. There is a lot of solutions out there for like small open source, like hobby miner setups, but like there's also a huge improvement in the whole rally on really the large scale monitoring system. So, and then of course also it's about like electricity at scale, like finding ways how to get really lowest cost of power. And all of the three, they determine a kind of the overall efficiency, and that's basically what really all of the components are getting optimized. And then of course like also miners are also optimizing further then. Like for example, there's now efforts like what we are, for example, also doing in the north of Sweden is basically to use excess heat. So basically, miners convert energy to 100%, close to 100% heat energy, and that is considered as a waste. So, but you could actually use that. So, for example, you could use the excess heat to channel it to a greenhouse and grow local vegetables and make use of it that way to increase further the efficiency. There's a lot of innovation on that front also, and I think those are milestones for the industry that drive the efficiency overall.
Yeah, I remember the ASIC was hot and loud. It was running nonstop. Yeah, so a lot of things change, and including the regulation as well. Some say regulation actually helping the massive adoptions for retails, protect them, but some say deregulation might help innovation to do a lot of things on the renewable energies, energy storage. So what do you guys observe from that perspective?
Well, maybe I'm the one former regulator on the panel, so I guess I would just begin as the former regulator by saying, you know, you should always remember Ronald Reagan's famous line about how the 9 scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So, you know, on the one hand, it is true that lacking some kind of regulatory framework sometimes causes investors to pull back from a sector. On the other hand, it's almost always the case that regulation has all kinds of unintended consequences because regulators are fallible human beings like everybody else. To me, the way I think about it is allowing miners to follow their economic incentives has generally produced a couple of really, really good things for the space, and the worry is that intense regulation will skew those incentives. We've seen this in the last 2 days, by the way.
Yep.
So the way that incentives have really worked super well is twofold. One is that at scale, Bitcoin mining has finally achieved a place where we create more value per unit of energy than many, many other large industrial scale production activities that people do in the world. So for example, the amount of energy required to produce $1 billion of value of Bitcoin is much, much less than is required for an airline company to produce $1 billion of value, a chemical company, a lot of other things that are industrial uses. And so being able to achieve that value optimization is sort of an amazing thing, particularly in a world where proof of work provides this kind of security. The other thing that I think you'd talk about a little bit is the development of adjacent technologies that crypto mining and Bitcoin in particular has spun off, things like, in the Bitfury world, immersion cooling, which now has jumped the shark from Bitcoin mining to high performance and scaling computing centers in places like AWS and Microsoft Azure facilities. So these are innovations we would never have had but for Bitcoin mining, where energy intensity is so high. And I would argue those things are super positive developments. If you have regulatory intervention like we saw in New York this week, right?
Yep.
So God forbid that passes the state Senate in New York, suddenly what you'll see are a whole bunch of miners that are looking for hydropower, and they will now flee to find natural gas power somewhere else. Why is that a good thing? But that is what happens when you have regulatory intervention. It's the law of unintended consequences.
It's just to pick up on maybe some things that my colleague said. Regulatory intervention is one thing, regulatory clarity is another. And I do think that one of the things that we all seek is regulatory clarity. Because when you have a clear path, right, it allows companies to operate in an efficient manner. It helps tremendously with capital formation. And one of the issues that I would say our industry is suffering from right now is that lack of regulatory clarity. And once we get that, we think that the pace of innovation should actually pick up, because we know the rules of the game. And it is true, as Marco said, the efficiency of the hardware has improved tremendously, right? So there's probably less of that to gain. The efficiency of power provision, the free markets have all kind of directed us to be very cognizant of how we bring power to bear. The scale that we've created that was referenced in those free markets has, in fact, incented us to bring power the right way. And so generally speaking, you find that it's the larger scale operators are taking advantage of the efficiencies that have occurred and that the capital markets want. And if we can just get that clarity, sort of the last piece, so to speak, not intervention, because I agree with everything Brian says, but if we can get clarity, that's going to help a lot for us to drive further efficiencies, because we'll know the path we should be taking.
And I think the other thing that clarity will bring is other participants to the table with a level of comfort to help us innovate. So if we think about bringing power companies into the conversation and Intel being comfortable now coming into the supply chain, I think that clarity brings more professionalization and participation, which can also drive further innovation into the adjacent spaces that are so critical to our ultimate success, but have been reticent to participate in innovative activities because it's lacked clarity.
Yep. Makes sense. And also, I want to follow up with the New York things. They just started thinking about more renewable energies. So from a CEO perspective, how are we going to maximizing the sustainabilities versus shareholders' returns? Is it pretty hard to do the comparisons?
I'll open that. I would say they're not mutually exclusive.
Agreed.
Right, at all. And again, all of us are very focused on the issue of power provision, right? And yes, it is a big cost of goods sold, so we want to bring our costs down. But the fact of the matter is that we are helping utilities and others bring more renewable power, but because the fact of that is that renewable power is actually less expensive power.
Right.
And that's something that crossed over. That was not true 10 or 15 years ago, but that is true now. And so we are incented, in fact, for both what I would call sort of the thoughtful capital markets reasons, which is to say that many of our shareholders are more attracted to our companies if, in fact, we're running a more environmentally friendly business, and we're incented from a pure capitalist or economic point of view to bring down our cost of goods sold, to bring that efficient energy to bear in our business, because frankly what that does is bring down our cost of capital, right? So we are completely aligned as an industry, especially those of us that are operating at scale, to have those goals, right? They coincide. They're completely consistent. And it's interesting because a lot of people do think that they're in fact mutually exclusive. And it's the opposite that is true.
Yeah, so I would just pick up on that, Mike, and say that the political weirdness of the moment, though, is that for whatever reason, Bitcoin mining, even renewable-based Bitcoin mining, is so politically controversial that many of the renewable energy producers aren't willing to associate their names with that. So just to give you an example, our US mining subsidiary, Cipher Mining, has two incredibly attractive zero carbon emission deals. One is a wind deal, the other is a solar deal. 250 total megawatts, so these are massive production facilities. And in both cases, our renewable partner insisted on contract terms for an NDA that we cannot identify the location of these facilities, the name of the partner, the specific source of which one is wind and which is solar. And why would that be, right? I think the reason it is, and this is a disturbing fact of the modern kind of political environment around Bitcoin in particular, is we live in a world where it's actually not about sustainability. It's actually about human beings just need to use less power. And I would argue that's a really pernicious political ideology that those of us in this community need to stand up and fight back against, which is human flourishing and growth is going to require more energy, not less, even though we want that energy to be less carbon intensive. If we can't say that sentence out loud, Bitcoin has a problem.
And Bitcoin mining can be part of the solution. That's the thing that I really struggle with. If we actually work together in conjunction with the power companies, the local community, we act as a grid stabilizer because we don't need to use the power during peak load, but we monetize it when it would otherwise be sitting idle. So there's just, I would also, on the point of ESG, it's not just about the E, it's the S and the G. Right now the conversation's all focused around one letter, but I think it's important that we recognize the ethos from which Bitcoin was born is really about the good of the many. And I think we need to refocus some of the narrative on why Bitcoin has value in the first place, why Bitcoin is worthy of any power at all. And I think in this room we all believe that and we all understand it, but I think that's where we're losing the conversation. I think we have to bring it back to what is our core value? What are we solving for that is for the good of humanity?
I agree. I mean, people are too focused on the environmental part. I mean, there's S and G. We can all working on making it more efficient and better world. How about Marco? What do you think about this this topic from the private sector's private market way?
I think that there's a lot of, I think this is a topic for the whole industry, and here really the players, larger players, also smaller players need to really work together to really correct the public perception on that field. It's rarely happening that the real fact and like the narrative, the public narrative and public perception is so much divergent as it is with Bitcoin and ESG. I think the facts are very clear. A lot of the public perception is driven by like drama headlines, but really not fundamental. If you go really deeper and look in these arguments, there's not so much that you can really that is really robust. I think it's clear by now that miners are converging towards renewable sources. Renewable sources are the cheapest around the world. Miners can contribute most using renewable sources because they are usually very seasonal. So you have these load management benefits and everything that the miners can use to stabilize the grids in those. We see that in Texas a lot. Like this is a very big example of a market that has very high swings. And in the end, we have to see like US alone has a 1,200 gigawatts of electrical capacity, and only 470 gigawatts are running on average. So that means more than half of it is just there, but not being consumed. So, but they need to be there to catch the spikes. And like, there needs to be a lot more optimization, and miners can be the solution to that. So
but we have to be part of the conversation, and right now we're not part of the conversation.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I agree. All the energy you don't use have to go to the ground. I just got to waste it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. So more coming from the perspective when we're thinking about like the market cycles. So right now, I think like the cost of capital is pretty low, even like historically lower than the cost of debt. And what does that do with the crypto mining? Does that help with any like efficiency to increase your skills, or how does everything going as you observed?
I think the mining cycles and the mining market, like looking back over the last 10 years, has been very brutal. And that is also what a lot of the miners that are now coming new to the market still have to realize, because the last year was, of course, and it is a very good time at the moment. And but we also have to see that there was like times where, for example, the crypto window was when Bitcoin price went down from 20,000 to 3,500, and lots of other corrections. Also, even 2013, when Bitcoin price first went from 100 to 1,000 towards end of 2013, but then came back from 1,000 to 200. Those were really stressful for the miners, but it was also a very good effect for clearing the market out. That means also that miners need to constantly innovate to be ahead of the curve. Efficiency is an extremely important factor. You need to be, if you want to be ahead of the curve in mining, you need to be the lowest cost producer. You have to have the highest efficiency. And if you're not at that level, then the next market cycle can really wipe you out. And we have seen that many times. So I think in that regard, now coming back to basically debt or equity financing, I think debt can be a very good source of capital. It is quite expensive at the moment still, but I also like a lot of miners are going towards equity because they also feel basically that they can be better, they can be more secure. But if you can be certain that you are among the lowest cost producer and the most efficient miner, then you can easily take good amount of debt for good conditions, because you know that you are basically, even if the market corrects, you will still be able to mine, while the others, while less efficient miners potentially have to drop out.
I'll jump in here on
please.
Capital markets and cost of capital, having spent a little bit of time in my career in that business. And I would take a little bit of a nuanced approach to that. There's cost of debt capital. So, for example, right now, if you have a miner that's installed and up and hashing, you can finance that at what I would call rates much less than the cost of equity right now, plus or minus 10%. So kind of classic asset-backed lending rates, which is one of the things, I guess, we all sitting up here, we control our infrastructure, we have the ability to deploy our machines as we want to, and so our access to that debt capital, I would actually argue, is pretty efficient. The cost of corporate debt capital is much less efficient, and the reason for that, of course, is because the markets right now view sort of unsecured corporate debt as equity risk, right? It's all about what's the risk you're taking? That's how things are priced. And right now, I would actually argue that the cost of equity is high. If you look at, a few of us up here publicly traded, And there are a good dozen or so publicly traded companies broadly defined as miners. Some are just folks that own a couple of rigs. Others actually own infrastructure and control their fate. But if you look at that, I would argue that we as an industry are the cost of our equity capital, which is to say the return that the market wants, which knocks your price down, that desired return is massive. Is massive. I don't know what the industry average would be, but we as a company, and we're a profitable company, right? We had net income last year. We had significant EBITDA last year. And we trade at low single digits multiples of EBITDA. My guess is that's comparable for the rest of the industry. I just don't look at their stats as much. And so I actually think right now the return on equity invested is immense. And I don't mean to talking our book, but I just on a historical level. So I think equity capital is actually very expensive. The only other thing I would say is that capital formation in this industry has gotten a lot tighter in the last few months. And as a result, we're probably going to see a good shakeout in this industry because there are a lot of the sort of smaller folks that are really long capital raise risk, right? Maybe they've put down 50% on their minor orders, or they have ordered some transformers and electrical gear.
Are they trying to catch up the market raise or like?
Well, there are a lot of folks that are trying to raise capital, and they're going to be hard pressed.
Right. Well, and can I mean, as somebody who has sort of been in that situation, let me just give you a theory as to why. So what's been really interesting over the last 6 months is, I think for the first time ever, miner stocks and Bitcoin price have completely decoupled, right? So it used to be that people looked at miner stocks as a way to get exposure to Bitcoin price movements without having to own the asset, right? And all of a sudden, over the last 6 months, Bitcoin fell back 40%, but miners fell back 80%. And why is that? Not clear, but I would argue there are at least two reasons for it. So one is ESG pressures became more and more intense, and the SEC in particular with their ESG disclosure rules made it harder for public miners to succeed in the equity markets, which is why people would rather buy Bitcoin than buy, Core Scientific, Marathon, Riot stock, relative to what they would have thought 6 months ago. So that's one thing. But I would also argue, Mike, that the relative lack of corporate debt financing is the other thing. It's the cost of funds has gotten inordinately high. Right. And that's not only because of the underlying risk of the asset or because of the ESG issues. This is one thing I saw very much when I was running the banking system, which is there is a belief among some large chartered lenders that they can't touch crypto any more than they can touch tobacco or pawn shops or whatever. It's a species of Operation Choke Point. And I know this for a fact because, we're doing an asset sale right now, and there were a couple of bulge bracket banks that turned us down, not because we don't have billions of dollars of value to sell in this company, but because their management committee or their board has said we can't touch Bitcoin miners. These are, again, things that radically skew the way markets would normally function. But that's one reason debt capital is not as available.
And I agree, and it kind of goes back to Jaime's point, which is that we we're viewed, if you will, because those are what in investing parlance is viewed as a sin industry.
Yep.
Gaming, smoking,
right.
Tobacco, et cetera. And that gets back to Jaime's point, which is that look, we think that we are doing something that's delivering great value. And somebody yesterday referred to this is an industry that's actually providing value to the billions rather than the billionaires, which I thought was an interesting sort of turn of phrase that I heard yesterday. So I can't take credit for it. But it gets back to that message because you're right. And by the way, if you try to go to the classic rating agencies, right, that in any other company I've ever been involved with in my career, if I walked in and I said, listen, we want a rating for a 2 times, debt to cash flow rated company, they'd be like, fine, no problem, here you go. And it'd be a good rating, and we'd go to market and we'd raise the capital. And you go to the rating agencies today and they say, well, we're not really sure what to call Bitcoin, how to classify it.
Right.
Is that in fact revenue? Yep. Which is crazy to me. I'm biased, but it's crazy.
Right.
But it gets back to the message. that Jaime was putting out, which is we have to help the world, if you will, understand that what we're doing is real, that the value is real, that the benefits are real, that they should be appreciated.
Not to hijack this, but I could just give you one other great example of this, actually, of the problems we have to solve as a community. So one of the really interesting things which prevents people from banking our industry is the fact that even though there's no definitive guidance on this, banks generally regard the accounting treatment of Bitcoin as the accounting treatment for an intangible asset versus a tangible asset. So let's just pause on that for 10 seconds. A tangible asset under the accounting standards, which gets very favorable capital treatment for lenders, is, among other things, currency. Doesn't matter what kind of currency. So dollars or Malaysian ringgits or Thai bahts or Russian rubles, they're all tangible assets and they get very favorable capital treatment. Bitcoin is treated worse than Malaysian ringgits or Russian rubles, right? And thus there's enormous capital required to be held against Bitcoin. These are crazy ideas, right? They're crazy ideas, but they are why you can't go to Bank of America and finance any of our companies.
And I'll just pile in a little bit as one of the oldest publicly traded miners. So we were born in a bull market and then hobbled our way through the bear market and learned all of the lessons along the way, which is why we take a balance sheet first approach and to our business, not wanting to relive some of the challenges there. But one of the reasons that we were one of the first public companies to start keeping Bitcoin on balance sheet was so that we could have something to leverage to access the capital markets when they were otherwise closed. And ultimately, that is part of how we survived the bear market, was going to a lender in this space that was willing to give us capital against our Bitcoin, so without selling our Bitcoin stack down. And that's kind of how we were able to buy equipment and come out of the bear market and capitalize on the bull market. And one of the nice things I think we've seen over the last 18 months is now we have more and more sophisticated, lower cost ways to raise capital using our Bitcoin. And I think that's only going to continue to get more sophisticated and accessible to miners, which is a really good thing and does help in the compression that we're seeing right now from a capital markets perspective. Yep,
agree. I mean, when we're actually thinking about like credit rating systems for the debt, like they don't have the category for Bitcoin, for cryptocurrencies. This is something like we need to push the traditional financial systems to have something like that, so we can be more capital efficient and improve the whole industry progress.
Yeah, well, Brian's right. I mean, if it was just treated as a tangible asset, it wouldn't be an issue.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It wouldn't be an issue. I mean, it's simple but difficult.
Yep. Yep. 100%. And we don't have much time left, and I just have one last question. A lot of people are caring about like the ETH 2.0 merge. That's a proof of stake. And do you see anything like, maybe this is for Marco, is like, do you see anything like affecting the proof of work, the mining industries, or this is actually not changing anything but making them?
I mean, this is obviously now a very important time for the crypto community to see on ETH now how, the proof of stake switch from Ethereum. The effort is going long back that they wanted to do the switch to proof of stake. I think at one point it will happen, but I think one thing is for sure, there will definitely not be any effect on Bitcoin and proof of work. Proof of work is extremely tied to the store of value for Bitcoin, and that's very important. And that makes Bitcoin so valuable also. So I think there is no chance that anyone will convince the community of Bitcoin that it would be better to change the consensus mechanism. So that is very clear. Ethereum doesn't have that store of value character. So they are more in like the decentralized application direction. I wish that this will be, of course, a good switch and a soft and secure switch to proof of stake. I think it would be good, but proof of work is what matters for Bitcoin. Proof of work is what will matter in the future for Bitcoin, and it's absolutely essential. And yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that all of the rest of the ecosystem needs Bitcoin to be successful, and it needs Bitcoin to be successful as a proof of work blockchain.
Yep. it's really the fundamental for everything. So yeah, cool. I wish we could have more time today, but really appreciate all the panelists. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, FTX.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.